This might be an uncomfortable conversation, but as a woman myself, I want to talk about some few things that I've noticed, and maybe you have too. I'm not speaking for all women, but I do want to speak for some of our behaviors as a collective. Sometimes we can be very hard to be around. I've witnessed it, I've experienced it, and at times I've been that person. There's a version of us that takes everything as an attack, thinks everyone's against us even when they're not.
Have you ever wondered what happens when an entire group of people is pushed to the breaking point, told they're not needed, and then decides to walk away for good? Today, we're diving into the seismic shift in society where men, fed up with decades of being vilified, are choosing solitude over chaos and thriving in ways that are shaking the foundations of modern relationships. Stick around until the very end because I'm going to reveal the one truth about this movement that nobody else is brave enough to say out loud. And it's going to change how you see everything. And if you're fired up by what we're about to unpack, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to smash that notification bell and select all to get every single Angry Guy video the moment it drops, because we're bringing the heat every time. For those of you ready to take control of your financial future, check out Angry's Crypto Academy, where you'll learn how to buy, sell, and trade crypto like a pro, protecting and growing your wealth in these wild times. The link's in the description, so go check it out right now. It's time to secure your bag. And if you're loving these Angry Guy videos, you can show some support by buying me a Red Bull to keep the energy high. That link's also in the description, so hit it up and let's keep this fire burning. Let's get real for a moment. For decades, men have been under siege, not just in their personal lives, but in every corner of society. It's a story that's been brewing for 50 years, a slow burn that turned into an inferno. And now the consequences are staring us all in the face. Women, emboldened by a particular brand of ideology, have spent half a century reshaping the world in ways that have left men battered, bruised, and frankly done with it all. They called it empowerment. But what it really amounted to was a relentless campaign to demonize men, to strip them of their dignity, and to push them out of every space they once called home. And now, men have listened, they've learned, and they've walked away. This isn't just a trend, it's a revolution, one that's rewriting the rules of society, and it's time we tell the story from the ground up. Picture this: a young man, maybe in his 20s, growing up in a world that tells him he's the problem just for existing. He's told his natural instincts are toxic, his ambitions are oppressive, even the way he sits is somehow a crime against humanity. They invented terms like manspreading to shame him for taking up space in a world he was born into, as if sitting comfortably on a subway seat makes him a villain. He turns on the news and he sees movements like Hash Me Too, which started with good intentions but morphed into a weapon, a witch hunt where any man could be accused, tried, and convicted in the court of public opinion without evidence or due process. He watches as men lose their jobs, their reputations, their lives, all because someone decided their glance lingered too long or their joke didn't land right. And he starts to wonder, is this what it means to be a man today? Is this the world I'm supposed to navigate? Now let's take that same young man and fast forward a decade. He's been through the ringer. He's seen his friends dragged through divorce courts, family courts, civil courts, legal battlegrounds where men are stripped of their wealth, their children, their futures, all to feed a system that thrives on their destruction. He's watched women wield the judicial system like a sledgehammer, extracting resources from men with no end in sight, turning relationships into financial transactions where the man always loses. He's been at the gym, minding his own business, only to be recorded by a woman claiming he stared at her when all he did was glance at the clock. That video gets posted online, and suddenly his name is mud. His job is at risk, and strangers are calling him a creep. He's seen women dress in ways that demand attention, then turn around and shame men for noticing, creating a no-win scenario where he's damned if he looks and damned if he doesn't. And through it all, he's been told one thing over and over: you're not needed. You're not wanted. Go away. So, what does he do? He listens, he learns, and he walks away. This isn't about giving up, it's about waking up. Men have realized that being alone doesn't mean feeling alone. They've discovered a truth that's been buried under decades of noise. Solitude can be peace, it can be freedom. For the first time in generations, men are asking themselves what they want, what makes them happy, and they're building lives around that. Instead of chasing approval from a society that's been kicking them in the teeth, they're not angry, at least not anymore. They're done. Done with the games, done with the chaos, done with relationships that feel like walking through a minefield blindfolded. And the result? They're thriving in ways that nobody saw coming. Let's paint a picture of what this looks like. A man in his 30s, maybe early 40s, wakes up in a home he's built for himself. It's not flashy, but it's his. No clutter, no drama, just the essentials. He's got a minimalist setup because, as it turns out, men don't need much to be content. A comfortable bed, a solid coffee maker, a gym membership, and a few hobbies that light him up. Maybe woodworking, maybe gaming, maybe hitting the open road on his motorcycle. He's not drowning in debt to impress someone who will never be satisfied. He's not stressing about family expenses or trying to keep up with a partner's endless demands. His money is his time is his, and for the first time in his life, he's calling the shots. This is what luxury looks like for the modern man: simplicity, control, and peace. Now, contrast that with what's happening on the other side. Women who spent decades telling men they weren't needed are starting to feel the weight of their own words. Social media is flooded with videos, TikToks, Reels, you name it, where women are sounding the alarm. They're saying it's impossible to survive out there, that life is too hard, that they need men to step back in, to pay for dinners, to send money, to fix the mess. Some are begging, others are demanding, but the message is the same: men, come back. But here's the thing: they're shouting into the void. Men aren't listening anymore. They're not on dating apps. They're not sliding into DMs. They're not footing the bill for expensive dates that lead nowhere. They've seen the patterns. They've recognized the games, and they're done playing. And as women face the harsh reality of a world without men's support, men are out here living their best lives, keeping their resources for themselves, and rediscovering what it means to be happy. This isn't just a personal shift, it's a societal earthquake. For centuries, men have stood between women and the brutal realities of the world, shielding them from the worst of it. They worked grueling jobs, fought wars, built civilizations, all while being told it was their duty to provide and protect. And what did they get in return? Decades of being called toxic, oppressive, unnecessary. They were told their masculinity was a problem, their strength was a threat, their very existence was an inconvenience. So they stepped back, they let go of the rope, and now, as the world starts to wobble without their steady hands, men are finding something they haven't had in a long time: rest. They're not worried about society's expectations anymore. They're not chasing validation from people who never valued them. They're focusing on self preservation, on building lives that make sense for them. And it's working. And let's talk about why this is happening, because it didn't come out of nowhere. The seeds were planted 50 years ago when a certain ideology took root and started reshaping how men and women interact. It wasn't just about equality, that's a goal most people can get behind. It was about something darker, something that turned men into scapegoats for every societal ill. They called it feminism, but it wasn't the feminism of the suffragettes or the women who fought for basic rights. This was a new beast, one that thrived on division, on painting men as the enemy. It told women they were perfect just as they were, that they didn't need men, that they could have it all without compromise. And it told men they were flawed, dangerous, and disposable. Over time, that message sank in, and men started to believe it, not that they were disposable, but that they didn't owe anyone anything anymore. The courts became a battleground. Divorce laws, family courts, civil suits, they all tilted heavily in one direction, and it wasn't toward fairness. Men watched as their friends, their brothers, their fathers were dragged through legal nightmares, losing their homes, their savings, their kids, all because the system was designed to see them as the bad guy. Paternity fraud became a cruel game where men were forced to pay for children who weren't theirs with no recourse. And it wasn't just the courts. Social media turned into a weapon, with women recording men in public, shaming them for the smallest perceived slights, and posting those videos to destroy reputations. Groups like Are We Dating the Same Guy and apps like The T became digital hit lists where women shared private details about men to ruin their social standing. It was open season, and men were the target. But here's where the story takes a turn. Men didn't just sit there and take it, they adapted. They learned to trust their own eyes, their own experiences over the narratives being shoved down their throats. They started seeing through the chaos, recognizing it for what it was, a deliberate attempt to keep them off balance, to make them question their worth. And once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. They realized that the women who claimed to be the table, who said their presence was enough, were offering nothing but drama and excuses. They saw the entitlement, the manipulation, the way relationships were turned into power struggles where men always lost. And they decided they were done playing a rigged game. This is where the narrative gets really interesting because it's not just about men walking away, it's about what they're walking toward. Men are rediscovering themselves, peeling back the layers of societal pressure and expectation to find out who they really are. They're embracing minimalism, not because it's trendy, but because it's practical. They don't need a mansion or a fancy car to feel good. They need a space that's theirs, a life that's theirs. They're investing in themselves, whether it's through fitness, hobbies, or learning new skills. They're building communities with other men who get it, who've been through the same grinder and come out stronger. And they're finding something that's been stolen from them for too long: joy. Think about it. A man who's walked away doesn't have to deal with the chaos of modern dating. He's not jumping through hoops to impress someone who's already decided he's not good enough. He's not shelling out hundreds of dollars for dinners that lead to nothing but a thanks, but no thanks. He's not dodging accusations or navigating a minefield of double standards. Instead, he's got the freedom to focus on what matters to him. Maybe he's restoring a classic car in his garage, or training for a marathon, or just enjoying a quiet evening with a good book and a strong drink. Whatever it is, it's his choice, and that's the point. For the first time in decades, men are choosing themselves, and it's a game changer. Let's dive back into this revolution because that's exactly what it is: a quiet, deliberate rebellion that's reshaping the world one man at a time. Men walking away isn't just a catchy phrase, it's a movement, a tidal wave of self awareness that's crashing over the shaky foundations of a society that thought it could vilify half its population and get away with it. For too long, men have been the punching bag for every grievance, real or imagined, and they finally had enough. They're not shouting from the rooftops or burning things down. They're doing something far more powerful. They're choosing themselves, their peace, their happiness, and in doing so, they're exposing the cracks in a system that relied on their compliance. This is the story of how men found their strength, not in fighting back, but in letting go. Imagine a man in his late 20s, early 30s, sitting at a coffee shop scrolling through his phone. He's not looking at dating apps or chasing likes on social media. He's reading about investing or maybe researching a new hiking trail or even just enjoying a moment of quiet with his thoughts. This guy isn't lonely, he's liberated. He's not chasing women who've made it clear they don't value him. He's not stressing about how to afford a date that'll cost him half his paycheck for no return. He's not worried about being recorded, shamed, or dragged online for existing in public. Instead, he's building a life that makes sense to him, one where he's the architect, not the servant. This is what freedom looks like, and it's spreading like wildfire. Now, let's talk about how we got here because this didn't happen overnight. The roots of this movement stretch back decades to a time when the social contract between men and women started to fray. It wasn't just about changing roles or pushing for equality. Those are conversations worth having. It was about a deliberate shift in how men were perceived, a campaign to paint them as the source of all problems. They called it progress, but it was something else entirely, a slow, systematic dismantling of men's place in the world. Women were told they were flawless, that they could do no wrong, that their feelings were the ultimate arbiter of truth. Men, on the other hand, were told they were broken, that their instincts were dangerous, that they needed to change to earn a seat at the table. And for a while, men tried. They bent over backwards, apologized for things they didn't do, and reshaped themselves to fit a mold that kept getting narrower. But here's the thing about human nature: you can only push people so far before they push back, or in this case, walk away. Men started noticing the patterns. They saw how the rules kept changing, how no matter what they did, it was never enough. They watched as women used the legal system to extract wealth and power, turning divorce into a business model and family courts into a one sided slaughterhouse. They saw how accusations became convictions, how a single word could ruin a man's life without proof or recourse. They noticed the double standards. Women could demand attention with their clothing, their behavior, their very presence, but men were punished for noticing, for speaking, for existing. And they started to ask themselves, why am I playing a game that I can't win? This awakening wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, personal, and deeply profound. Men began to trust their own observations over the narratives being fed to them. They started comparing notes, sharing stories, and realizing they weren't alone. Online communities sprang up, not as places to vent or complain, but as spaces to rebuild, to rediscover what it means to be a man in a world that doesn't want them. They talked about minimalism, about cutting out the noise and focusing on what matters. They shared strategies for protecting their finances, their mental health, their peace. And most importantly, they realized that happiness doesn't come from chasing someone else's approval, it comes from within. Let's pause for a moment and look at what this looks like in practice. Picture a man in his 40s, maybe a former corporate grinder who's traded his soul crushing job for something simpler. He's not rich, but he's comfortable. He's got a small apartment, a solid gym routine, and a group of buddies who meet up for poker or fishing every couple of weeks. His life isn't flashy, but it's full. He's not worried about impressing a woman who will judge him for his car or his bank account. He's not jumping through hoops to meet society's expectations. He's got a couple of side hustles. Maybe he's flipping vintage furniture or teaching a skill online, and he's saving his money, not spending it on someone else's lifestyle. This guy isn't just surviving, he's thriving because he's finally living for himself. Now let's flip the script and look at what's happening on the other side of this divide. Women are starting to feel the consequences of a world where men have checked out. Social media is a goldmine of evidence. Videos of women lamenting how hard life is, how they can't afford rent, how they're struggling to keep up. Some are asking for help, others are demanding it. But the common thread is clear. They're realizing that the safety net men provided is gone. For years, men were the ones paying for dates, covering bills, fixing cars, stepping in when things got tough. They were the buffer between women and the harsh realities of the world. But now, that buffer is gone, and women are facing those realities head on. And it's not pretty. You see it everywhere. TikToks of Women complaining that men won't approach them anymore, that dating apps are a ghost town, that nobody's sending money to their Cash App anymore. They're shocked, confused, even angry, because they were told they could have it all without needing men. They were told they were enough, that their presence was the prize, that men would always be there waiting in the wings. But men aren't waiting anymore. They're not lining up to play a game that's rigged against them. They're not shelling out for dinners that lead nowhere, not chasing women who've made it clear they don't value them. And as women grapple with this new reality, men are out here building lives of quiet luxury, simple, focused, and free. This isn't about revenge or spite, it's about self preservation. Men have realized that their time, their energy, their resources are finite, and they're choosing to invest those things in themselves. They're not angry, at least not most of them. They're past that. They've moved on to a place of clarity where they see the world for what it is, not what they're told it should be. They've learned to trust their pattern recognition, to see through the noise and focus on observable reality. And what they see is a system that's been stacked against them for decades, a society that's taken their contributions for granted while punishing them for existing. So they've opted out. They've chosen peace over chaos, simplicity over drama, and they're not looking back. Let's talk about what this means for society because the ripple effects are massive. Men walking away isn't just a personal choice, it's a structural shift that's shaking the foundations of everything. Think about it. Men have always been the backbone of civilization. They built the roads, the buildings, the systems that keep the world running. They took the dangerous jobs, the thankless tasks, the roles nobody else wanted, and they did it in large part because they believed it was their duty to provide, to protect, to serve. But what happens when they stop? What happens when the people who've been holding it all together decide they're done? We're starting to find out, and it's not a pretty picture. Businesses are feeling it first. Industries that relied on men's spending, restaurants, jewelry stores, even the dating app industry are taking a hit. Men aren't dropping hundreds of dollars on dates anymore. They're not buying engagement rings or footing the bill for lavish weddings. They're keeping their money, investing it in themselves, or saving it for the future. And it's not just the economy. The social fabric is fraying. Marriage rates are plummeting, birth rates are dropping, and entire communities are shrinking because men and women aren't connecting anymore. Women are noticing and they're sounding the alarm, but it's too late. The men they pushed away aren't coming back. This brings us to a critical point, the myth of the powerful victim. For decades, women were sold a narrative that they could be both victims and victors, that they could claim oppression while wielding immense power. They were told they were entitled to everything, respect, resources, relationships, without having to offer anything in return. They were encouraged to see themselves as the ultimate arbiters of truth, to demand without giving, to take without building. And for a while, it worked because men kept playing along. But men aren't playing anymore. They've seen the contradiction, the hypocrisy, and they've decided it's not their problem. They're not here to fix a mess they didn't create. Let's zoom in on one aspect of this, modern dating. It's a perfect microcosm of everything we're talking about. Dating today is a minefield for men, a gauntlet of impossible expectations and unwritten rules. Women demand the perfect man, tall, wealthy, charming, emotionally available, but they're not offering the same in return. They expect men to pay for everything, to plan elaborate dates, to jump through endless hoops, all while navigating a culture where one wrong move can cost them everything. A bad date can end up on social media. A misinterpreted comment can go viral, and a single accusation can ruin a man's life. So, what's a man to do? He walks away, he deletes the apps, stops approaching women, and focuses on himself. And the result? Dating is collapsing, and women are left wondering where all the good men went. The truth is, the good men didn't disappear. They opted out. They realized that the cost of modern relationships is too high. The risks are too great, and the rewards are too few. They've seen women use dating as a game, stringing men along for free meals, attention, or social clout. They've watched as women post their dates online, sharing private details to groups that exist to shame and destroy. They've learned that even the best intentions can backfire, that no amount of effort guarantees success. So they've chosen a different path, one where they don't have to beg for scraps or risk everything for nothing. And in that choice, they've found something better: self respect. This shift is forcing everyone to confront some hard truths. Women are realizing that they can't have it all, not without men's cooperation. They're learning that the world is tougher, colder, and more unforgiving than they were led to believe. They're facing the reality that men's contributions, their time, their money, their strength were never guaranteed. And now that they're gone, the void is impossible to ignore. Some women are adapting, reevaluating their priorities, and trying to rebuild bridges. But for most, the response is denial, anger, or desperation because they were never prepared for a world where men say no. Meanwhile, men are writing a new chapter. They're not just surviving, they're thriving in ways that defy the stereotypes. They're not the sad, lonely basement dwellers the media loves to caricature. They're entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, travelers, men who've taken the energy they once spent chasing approval and redirected it into building lives they love. They're forming brotherhoods, not out of resentment, but out of shared purpose. They're rediscovering the joy of simple pleasures: a cold beer, a good workout, a sunrise hike. They're proving that happiness doesn't come from external validation, but from internal peace. And that's something nobody can take away. Let's talk about the bigger picture, because this isn't just about individuals, it's about the future. What happens to a society where men and women are no longer partners, but adversaries? What happens when the people who've always carried the load decide to put it down? We're seeing the early signs: economic stagnation, social fragmentation, a culture that's more divided than ever. But men aren't here to fix it, not this time. They've spent too long being blamed for problems they didn't create, punished for sins they didn't commit. They're done apologizing, done compromising, done sacrificing. They're focusing on what they can control: their own lives, their own happiness. This brings us to a question that's worth asking: what's next? For men, the path is clear. They're going to keep walking away, keep building, keep finding peace in a world that tried to break them. They're going to invest in themselves, their skills, their passions. They're going to create communities that value them, spaces where they can be honest without fear of judgment. They're going to live on their own terms. And in doing so, they're going to redefine what it means to be a man in the 21st century. It's not about rejecting women or society. It's about rejecting a system that rejected them first. For women, the future is less certain. Some will double down, clinging to the narratives that got us here. They'll keep demanding, keep blaming, keep hoping that men will come back and fix everything. But most will have to face reality sooner or later. They'll have to ask themselves what they're bringing to the table, what they're offering in a world where men are no longer obligated to play along. They'll have to confront the fact that relationships are a two-way street, that entitlement doesn't build bridges, that respect is earned, not demanded. And for those who can't or won't adapt, the road ahead will be tough because the safety net is gone and it's not coming back. Let's dive into the heart of this revolution, because what we're witnessing isn't just a moment, it's a reckoning. Men walking away, or MBAWA as we call it, is more than a trend. It's a psychological and cultural pivot that's rewriting the rules of human interaction. For decades, men were told they were the problem, that their strength, their ambition, their very existence was somehow oppressive. They were fed a steady diet of shame, guilt, and blame, while the world around them shifted to prioritize feelings over facts, narratives over reality. And now, after years of being pushed to the edge, men have made a choice. They're done. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with clarity. They've seen the game for what it is and they're refusing to play. Picture a man in his mid 30s sitting in his apartment surrounded by the things that matter to him. Maybe it's a bookshelf filled with novels he's always wanted to read, a guitar he's teaching himself to play, or a laptop where he's building a side hustle that could turn into something big. This guy isn't chasing status or validation. He's not stressing about how to impress a woman who's already decided he's not enough. He's not draining his bank account to fund someone else's lifestyle. Instead, he's investing in himself, his mind, his body, his future. This is what empowerment looks like, not the kind that's shouted from stages or plastered on billboards, but the quiet, unshakable kind that comes from knowing your worth and refusing to settle for less. This shift didn't happen in a vacuum. It's the result of a cultural machine that spent 50 years grinding men down, telling them they were toxic, unnecessary, replaceable. It started with subtle jabs, jokes about men being incompetent, ads portraying them as bumbling fools, media narratives that cast them as the villain in every story. But it didn't stop there. It escalated to outright hostility, accusations without evidence, public shaming for the smallest perceived slights, entire movements designed to punish men for existing. They called it man spreading when a man sat comfortably on a bus. They called it toxic masculinity when a man showed strength or confidence. They called it privilege when a man worked hard to provide for others. And through it all, the message was clear: you're not wanted, you're not needed, go away. So men did exactly that. They walked away, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. They realized that the world they were told to serve no longer served them. They saw the double standards. Women could demand attention with their actions, their clothing, their presence, but men were vilified for noticing. Women could use the legal system to extract wealth, destroy families, and ruin lives, while men were left with no recourse. Women could post videos online shaming men for daring to exist in public, and the world would applaud. Men saw it all, and they learned. They learned that the system wasn't broken, it was built this way. And instead of fighting a losing battle, they chose to build something new: lives of purpose, simplicity, and peace. Let's talk about the psychology of this because it's fascinating. Men walking away isn't just about rejecting modern relationships, it's about reclaiming mental sovereignty. For years, men were bombarded with messages designed to make them doubt themselves. They were told their instincts were wrong, their desires were shameful, their contributions were meaningless. It was psychological warfare, and it took a toll. But something remarkable happened. Men started to break free. They began to trust their own minds, to question the narratives, to seek out truth over propaganda. They found solace in solitude, not because they're antisocial, but because they realized that peace is better than chaos, that clarity is better than confusion. This mental shift is why MWA is so powerful. It's not just about physical withdrawal, it's about emotional and intellectual independence. Men are learning to value themselves, not through the lens of what others think, but through their own standards. They're asking questions like, what do I want? What makes me happy? What kind of life do I want to build? And the answers are leading them to places society never expected. They're starting businesses, mastering new skills, exploring passions they'd long ignored. They're forming bonds with other men, not out of desperation, but out of shared values. They're discovering that happiness doesn't come from external approval, it comes from within. And it's a revelation that's changing everything. Now, let's look at the economic side, because this movement is hitting wallets hard. Men have always been the economic engine of society, not because they're inherently better, but because they've been conditioned to provide. They worked the long hours, took the risky jobs, spent their money to keep families and relationships afloat. But when men walk away, that engine starts to sputter. Dating apps are losing revenue because men aren't signing up anymore. Restaurants and entertainment venues are seeing fewer couples because men aren't footing the bill for expensive dates. The wedding industry, the jewelry market, even the housing sector, they're all feeling the pinch because men are keeping their money for themselves. And it's not just about spending, it's about earning. Men are opting for simpler lives, taking less stressful jobs, or focusing on side hustles that give them freedom. not chains. This economic shift is a wake up call for everyone. Women who were told they could be independent without men are starting to see the limits of that promise. They're facing rising costs, stagnant wages, and a world that's less forgiving than they were led to believe. Social media is filled with their stories. Videos of women struggling to pay bills, lamenting the lack of good men to step in and help. They're realizing that the safety net men provided, the dinners, the repairs, the financial support, wasn't guaranteed. And now that it's gone, they're scrambling. Some are adapting, learning to stand on their own, but others are doubling down, demanding that men return as if entitlement alone will bring them back. Spoiler alert, it won't. This brings us to the cultural narratives that fueled this divide, because they're the root of the problem. For decades, we've been fed a story that pits men against women, that casts one as the oppressor and the other as the oppressed. It's a simple story, and that's why it's so seductive, but it's also a lie. The truth is messier, more complex, and far more human. Men and women aren't enemies, they're complements designed to work together to balance each other's strengths and weaknesses. But when you spend 50 years telling one group they're the problem while elevating the other as flawless, you break that balance. You create resentment, distrust, and eventually disconnection. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. The irony is that the very ideologies that claim to empower women have left them more vulnerable than ever. By telling women they didn't need men, they were set up to face a world that's harsher, colder, and more unforgiving than they were prepared for. By telling men they were disposable, they were pushed to a point where they had nothing left to lose. And now, as men walk away, the consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. Marriage rates are at historic lows. Birth rates are plummeting, and entire economies are teetering because the foundation of society, men and women working together, is crumbling. This isn't progress, it's regression, and we're all paying the price. But here's where it gets interesting. Men aren't just surviving this collapse, they're thriving in it. They're proving that you don't need society's approval to live a good life. They're showing that simplicity is luxury, that peace is power, that self reliance is freedom. They're building lives that reflect their values, not someone else's expectations. They're finding joy in the small things: a morning run, a well cooked meal, conversation with a friend who gets it. And they're doing it all without the weight of a system that tried to break them. This is the future of MWA, and it's a future worth fighting for. What if the collapse of modern society isn't an accident, but the inevitable result of a decades long campaign to dismantle the very people who held it together? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the men walking away movement, exposing the hidden forces that pushed men to the brink and the unstoppable momentum of their choice to reclaim their lives. By the end of this video, I'm going to share a vision of what the world looks like 10 years from now if this revolution keeps growing. And trust me, it's a future that will shock you to your core. This is Angry Guy, and we're about to go deeper than ever before. Let's start by rewinding the clock, because to understand why men are walking away, we need to trace the roots of this movement back to where it all began. 50 years ago, the world was a different place. Men and women had defined roles, not perfect, not always fair, but functional. Society worked because people understood their responsibilities, and there was a mutual respect, a balance that kept things stable. Men provided, protected, and built. Women nurtured, supported, and maintained. It wasn't about one being better than the other. It was about complementarity, about two halves making a whole. But then a shift began. Not organic, but orchestrated, a deliberate push to upend that balance and rewrite the rules of human interaction. It started with a movement that promised equality, but quickly morphed into something else. Feminism, in its early days, fought for women's right to vote, to work, to be seen as equals, goals most men supported. But by the 1970s, it had taken a darker turn, one that didn't just lift women up, but tore men down. The narrative shifted from partnership to antagonism, casting men as oppressors and women as victims. It wasn't enough to give women opportunities. Men had to be punished, their contributions erased, their identities vilified. This wasn't progress, it was division, a wedge driven between the sexes that would grow wider with every passing decade. Picture a young man growing up in the 1980s or 1990s watching this unfold. He's told in school that his gender is the root of all evil, that his natural instincts are wrong, that he needs to apologize for existing. He turns on the TV and sees sitcoms portraying men as clueless idiots, fathers as bumbling fools, husbands as punching bags. He reads articles that call his ambition toxic masculinity, his confidence male privilege, his strength a threat. And he starts to internalize it, to question himself, to wonder if maybe he is the problem. But then he grows up, enters the world, and sees the reality, a system rigged against him, where his hard work is taken for granted, his sacrifices are mocked, and his life can be derailed by a single accusation. This is where the media comes in because it's been the gasoline on this fire. For decades, the media, movies, TV, news, and later social media, has amplified the narrative that men are disposable. Hollywood churns out stories where men are either villains or buffoons, rarely heroes. News outlets run headlines that turn minor incidents into indictments of all men, framing every interaction as a potential crime. And then came the internet, a double edged sword that gave men a voice, but also weaponized public shaming. Social media platforms became battlegrounds where women could record a man in a moment of vulnerability, post it online, and watch it go viral, destroying his reputation in hours. The media didn't just reflect the culture, it shaped it, turning men into targets and women into untouchable arbiters of truth. Let's talk about a specific example, because this hits home. Imagine a guy, let's call him Jake, in his late 20s, out at a coffee shop. He's minding his own business, maybe glancing around while waiting for his order. A woman nearby, phone in hand, decides he looked at her wrong. She starts recording, narrating to her followers that this guy is creeping on her, even though all he did was exist in the same space. The video gets posted, racking up thousands of views, with comments piling on, calling Jake a predator, a loser, a threat. By the next day, his employer sees it and he's called into HR. He tries to explain, but it doesn't matter. The damage is done. His name is trashed, his job is at risk, and he's got no way to fight back. This isn't a hypothetical, it's happening every day. And it's one of the reasons men are saying enough. Technology made this possible, but it also gave men a way out. The same internet that enabled public shaming also created spaces for men to connect, to share their stories, to realize they're not alone. Forums, subreddits, YouTube channels, places where men could speak freely, away from the judgment of a world that branded them toxic. They started comparing notes, seeing the patterns, the unfair court rulings, the biased media, the endless double standards. And they began to build something new, not a movement of anger, but one of clarity. They called it Men Walking Away, or MWA. And it's grown into a global phenomenon because this isn't just an American story, it's universal. Let's zoom out and look at the global picture because MWA is crossing borders. In Japan, they call it herbivore men, guys who've opted out of dating and marriage, choosing careers or hobbies over relationships. In Europe, men are delaying marriage or avoiding it altogether, focusing on travel, fitness, or personal growth. In South Korea, the 4B movement has women rejecting men, but men are responding in kind, retreating into their own lives, uninterested in a game that's stacked against them. Everywhere you look, men are making the same choice to step back, to prioritize themselves, to find peace in a world that's been anything but peaceful. And the impact is staggering. Economies are slowing, populations are shrinking, and societies are grappling with the loss of the very people they took for granted. This global spread is no accident. It's the result of a shared experience, a collective awakening driven by the same forces, media narratives, legal biases, cultural vilification. Men in different countries might speak different languages, but they're reading from the same script. They've seen their friends lose everything in divorce courts, their brothers shamed online, their fathers broken by a system that sees them as ATMs. They've watched as women demand more while offering less, as society expects everything while giving nothing. And they've decided that the cost of participation is too high. They're not boycotting relationships out of spite. They're choosing self preservation over self destruction. And it's a choice that's resonating worldwide. Now, let's get philosophical because MWA isn't just a reaction, it's a mindset. At its core, it's about rejecting external validation and embracing internal truth. For too long, men were taught that their worth came from what they provided: money, protection, status. They were told to sacrifice, to serve, to put others first, even at the cost of their own happiness. But MWA flips that script. It says, your worth is inherent, not contingent. Your happiness is your responsibility, not someone else's privilege. Your life is yours to build, not a resource to be extracted. This is a radical idea in a world that spent decades telling men they're nothing without women, without society, without approval. This philosophy is why MWA is so resilient. It's not about anger or resentment, those burn out. It's about clarity, about seeing the world as it is and choosing to live on your own terms. Men are discovering that solitude isn't loneliness, it's freedom. They're learning that peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of purpose. They're realizing that the things they were told to chase, relationship, status, validation, are often traps designed to keep them tethered to a system that doesn't care about them. And in that realization, they're finding something profound: joy. Let's paint a picture of what this joy looks like because it's not what the stereotypes suggest. It's a man in his 40s waking up to a sunrise he actually has time to enjoy because he's not rushing to a job he hates to fund someone else's lifestyle. It's a guy in his 20s teaching himself to code, not to impress anyone, but because he loves the challenge. It's a group of friends, men who've walked away, sitting around a campfire, sharing stories, laughing, building bonds that don't depend on external approval. These men aren't sad or broken. They're alive in a way they haven't been in years because they've finally given themselves permission to live for themselves. This brings us to the counter arguments because no movement is without its critics. Some will say men walking away is selfish, that it's abandoning responsibility, that it's harming society. They'll argue that men have a duty to provide, to marry, to raise families, even if the system punishes them for it. They'll claim that MWAA is just a tantrum, a bunch of guys who can't handle rejection or modern women's independence. But let's be real. These arguments miss the point. Men aren't walking away because they're weak. They're doing it because they're strong enough to see the truth. They're not abandoning society. Society abandoned them first with its biased laws, its shaming culture, its endless demands. And as for responsibility, what about the responsibility to yourself, to your mental health, to your happiness? What MWA isn't about dodging duty. It's about redefining it. Others will argue that women are just as hurt by this system, that they're victims too, caught in the same cultural mess. And there's some truth there. Nobody wins in a divided society, but the difference is his accountability. Men have been held accountable for everything from systemic issues to personal failings, while women have been told they can do no wrong, that their choices are always valid, that their feelings trump reality. MWAT is men holding themselves accountable, not to society's expectations, but to their own standards. It's men saying, I'm done carrying the weight of a world that hates me. And that's not victimhood, it's empowerment. Let's talk about the future because this is where it gets wild. 10 years from now, if MWA keeps growing, we're looking at a world that's unrecognizable. Economies will contract as men spend less and earn differently, forcing industries to adapt or collapse. Populations will shrink, with some countries facing existential crises as birth rates plummet. Women will face increasing pressure to provide for themselves, leading to a reckoning with the narratives that promise them everything for nothing. And men? They'll be living lives of quiet luxury, simple, purposeful, free. They'll be the architects of a new culture, one that values truth, self reliance, and mutual respect over entitlement and division. This is the vision, and it's closer than you think. But this future isn't set in stone. It depends on what we do now. For men, it means staying the course, building communities, sharing knowledge, and never apologizing for choosing yourself. For society, it means confronting the lies that got us here, rebuilding trust, and creating systems that don't punish half the population. And for those who resist, who cling to the old ways, the message is clear: adapt or be left behind. The world is changing, and MWA is leading the charge, not with anger, but with purpose. This isn't just a personal choice for men, it's a cultural reset, a chance to redefine what it means to live a good life in a world that's lost its way. Men walking away are showing us that you don't need to follow society's script to find happiness. They're proving that you can reject the noise, the drama, the endless demands, and still come out on top. They're building lives that are lean, focused, and fulfilling, not because they're trying to prove a point, but because they've seen the alternative and want no part of it. This is the power of MWA. It's not about tearing down, but about building up, about creating something better from the ashes of a system that failed them. And the more men join this movement, the clearer it becomes. This isn't a phase, it's a new way of being. Let's talk about the women who are watching this because they're part of this story too. Some of you might be angry, thinking this is an attack, that men walking away is somehow a betrayal. But hear me out. This isn't about you as individuals. It's about a system, a culture that's been weaponized against men for decades. Men aren't walking away from women who value them, who respect them, who see them as partners. They're walking away from a game that's rigged, from relationships that feel like traps, from a society that tells them they're the villain no matter what they do. If you're a woman who wants to change this, who wants to build bridges, start by looking at the bigger picture. Ask yourself, what am I bringing to the table? How can I show respect, not just demand it? Because men aren't coming back for promises, they're coming back for proof. And to the men out there, let's be clear: walking away doesn't mean giving up. It means taking control. It means recognizing that your time, your energy, your life are yours to shape. You don't owe anyone your happiness, your money, or your future. You don't have to prove your worth to a world that's already decided you're not enough. MWA is about setting your own standards, building your own path, and living a life that makes you proud. Maybe that's a quiet cabin in the woods, a thriving business, or a group of brothers who've got your back. Whatever it is, it's yours, and nobody can take that away. So keep walking, keep building, and don't look back because the world you're creating is better than the one you left behind. Now let's address the bigger question. What does this mean for the future? Because MWA isn't just a moment, it's a movement with legs, and it's going to shape the world in ways we're only starting to see. In 10 years, if men keep walking away, we're looking at a society that's fundamentally different. Marriage rates, already at historic lows, could drop to near zero in some places, as men opt out of relationships that offer more risk than reward. Birth rates, already declining, could hit critical levels, forcing governments to rethink everything from welfare to immigration. Economies will shift as men spend less on dating, weddings, and family expenses, redirecting their resources to personal growth, travel, or investments. Industries that relied on men's wallets, think restaurants, jewelry, real estate, will either adapt or crumble. But it's not just about numbers, it's about culture. As men walk away, they're creating a new kind of masculinity, one that's not defined by what you provide for others, but by what you build for yourself. This isn't the stoic, self sacrificing man of the past, nor the caricature of toxic masculinity the media loves to push. It's a man who knows his worth, who sets his boundaries, who lives by his own code. This new masculinity is minimalist, and not because it's trendy, but because it's practical. cutting out the clutter of society's expectations and focusing on what truly matters. It's resilient, not because it's loud, but because it's grounded in truth. And it's spreading not through protests or hashtags, but through quiet, deliberate choices, one man at a time. This future isn't all rosy, though. There's a cost to this shift, and we need to be honest about it. As men walk away, the social fabric frays, communities shrink, families dissolve, and the bonds that held society together weaken. Women who were told they could have it all without men will face the harsh reality of a world that's less forgiving, less supportive, less safe. Some will rise to the challenge, learning to stand on their own, building lives of independence and purpose. Others will struggle, caught in a cycle of denial or desperation, unable to adapt to a world where men no longer play the role they were assigned. And society as a whole will have to grapple with the consequences of its own choices. Because you can't vilify half your population and expect the machine to keep running smoothly. Let's talk about the critics because they're out there and they're loud. Some will say MPUA is selfish, that men are abandoning their responsibilities, that they're hurting society by opting out. They'll argue that men have a duty to marry, to raise kids, to keep the system going, even if it chews them up and spits them out. But let's flip that script. What about society's responsibility to men? What about the duty to create a system that's fair, that doesn't punish men for existing, that doesn't strip them of their rights, their wealth, their dignity? Men aren't walking away because they're weak. They're walking away because they're strong enough to see the truth, to recognize a rigged game, and refuse to play. And that's not abandonment, it's self respect. Others will claim that MWA is just a reaction to women's empowerment, that men are throwing a tantrum because they can't handle strong, independent women. But that's a lazy take, and it falls apart under scrutiny. Men aren't walking away from women who are strong. They're walking away from a culture that weaponizes strength against them, that uses empowerment as a cudgel to shame, manipulate, and control. They're not afraid of independent women. They're tired of women who demand dependence while preaching independence, who expect men to provide without offering partnership in return. MWA isn't about fear, it's about clarity, about seeing the double standards and choosing a better path. There's another argument we need to tackle, that men walking away is a temporary blip, a phase that'll fade as society fixes itself. But here's the reality, this isn't temporary. Men have seen too much, learned too much to go back to the way things were. They've watched their friends lose everything in court, their brothers shamed online, their fathers broken by a system that sees them as disposable. They've seen the patterns, recognized the lies, and they're not unseeing it. The genie's out of the bottle, and no amount of promises or reforms will put it back. Men are building lives they love, and they're not trading that for a system that's burned them one too many times. So, what's the end game? For men, it's simple. Keep walking, keep building lives of purpose, peace, and freedom. Keep investing in yourself, your skills, your passions, your health. Keep forming communities with other men who get it, who've seen the truth and chosen the same path. The world will try to guilt you, shame you, lure you back with empty promises, but you're stronger than that. You've seen the matrix and you're not plugging back in. For those of you just starting this journey, know this, it's not easy, but it's worth it. The first step is the hardest, but every step after that gets lighter because you're walking towards something real, something yours. For society, the path is murkier. It starts with honesty, admitting the mistakes, the biases, the lies that got us here. It means rebuilding systems that don't punish men for being men, that don't reward division over unity. It means creating a culture that values partnership, not antagonism, where men and women can work together without fear or resentment. But that's a big ask, and it won't happen overnight. In the meantime, men will keep walking because they're not waiting for permission to live their lives. They're not waiting for society to catch up. They're forging ahead, and the world will either adapt or be left behind. Let's zoom out one last time, because this isn't just about men or women, it's about humanity. We're at a crossroads, a moment where we decide what kind of world we want to live in. Do we keep going down the path of division where every group is pitted against the others, fighting for scraps in a zero-sum game? Or do we choose something better, a world where people are judged for their actions, not their identity, where respect is mutual and relationships are built on trust? MWA is a wake-up call, a reminder that actions have consequences, that you can't push people to the edge and expect them to stay. It's a chance to rethink everything, to build something new, not just for men, but for everyone. But that's the big picture. And I know you're here for the real talk. So let's bring it home. Men walking away is the most powerful thing happening today, not because it's loud, but because it's quiet. It's men saying, I'm done, and meaning it. It's men choosing peace over chaos, truth over lies, self over sacrifice. It's a revolution, not of fists or fire, but of minds and hearts, of men who've had enough and are building something better. And it's just getting started. The world is watching, and whether it likes it or not, MWA is here to stay. I want to hear from you. What did you think about what we discussed today? Do you agree that men walking away is the natural response to decades of being pushed out? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Let's get the conversation going. Like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you love what we're doing, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Just remember, all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.